This is CNN Student News. I'm Carl Azus at the CNN Center in Atlanta, Georgia. Today's current events coverage begins on an island in the Aegean Sea. It's part of the nation of Greece, and it's ground zero for thousands of migrants and refugees streaming into Europe, those who risk a dangerous crossing over the Mediterranean. We've talked about Europe's largest influx of refugees since World War II. And with tensions rising in some places between Europeans and the migrants, several countries are making it harder for people to seek asylum. Germany is working on new rules for refugees. We told you about Denmark's controversial law that analysts say was designed to discourage migrants and refugees from coming there. Sweden and Finland recently said they'd deport tens of thousands of asylum seekers. But in part of Greece, it's a different story. Though it's been criticized for not protecting Europe's borders, it has opened its doors and kept them open to migrants.
The sun rises over Turkey, its hills silhouetted in the distance. The expanse of water between them and the Greek island of Lesbos, crossed by more than 500,000 people last year. This is the main gateway to Europe. The Greek islanders found themselves the first responders in the months before the Coast Guard increased its numbers over the summer. For their actions, kindness, and generosity, there have been petitions to nominate the islanders for the Nobel Peace Prize. The massive influx of migrants and refugees completely changed the nature of this tourist destination. All islanders have pitched in, drying clothes, providing food, blankets, and even risking jail time.
The flood of migrants burst suddenly. No one was prepared. Not us, not Europe.
Everybody down! Everybody down!
But Mayor Gallinos Spiros says the island of Lesbos decided to put humanity first. The European Union is now slamming Greece over Schengen failures, improper background checks for migrants, and inadequate protection of the external border of the passport-free zone. The winter months have slowed but not stopped the refugees and migrants from coming. January of last year saw around 750 people land here. So far this January, 25,000 have arrived on this island.
Results from yesterday's Iowa caucuses, the first state contests in the U.S. race for the White House, were still coming in last night when we produced this show. But you know we'll bring them to you when we get them. Teachers, for the latest updates on Iowa, we recommend CNN.com. And our last two shows have great explainers on the significance of the caucuses, how they're actually conducted, and the bit of controversy that's associated with them. You can find both programs in the archive section of CNNStudentNews.com. At CNNStudentNews.com, making one request a day is the way to get on our roll call. Pechursk School International is first up. Thank you for taking 10 minutes for our show in the Ukrainian capital of Kiev. To Northwest Oregon, not too far from Portland, is the city of Sandy. That's the home of the storm rolling in at Cedar Ridge Middle School. And in the capital of Oklahoma, we're calling on the Jaguars of Westmore High School. Hello to our friends in Oklahoma City. U.S. sports fans are gearing up for the National Football League Championship. The Super Bowl is one of the most watched sporting events in America. About a third of the country sees the game. On Sunday, the Carolina Panthers will face off against the Denver Broncos in Super Bowl 50. The sport itself has gotten some negative publicity in recent years because of the effects of concussions. There's a movie out called Concussion. A Broncos cornerback will be wearing a new kind of helmet meant to better prevent concussions. During the 2015 season, more than 300 of these head injuries were reported in the NFL. What may be more concerning than the concussions themselves is the brain disease that repeated head trauma can lead to. Former football players continue to be diagnosed posthumously with CTE.
Lately, it's been difficult to talk about football without mentioning concussions. Why? Well, mounting concern over a disease called chronic traumatic encephalopathy, more commonly known as CTE. In the world of medicine, CTE is a relative newcomer. In football, we just learned about it 10 to 15 years ago. Here's what we can say. It's a progressive degenerative brain disease. It is like Alzheimer's. It can start with memory loss, mood swings, and difficulty in concentration, developing into progressive dementia even possible thoughts of suicide. But unlike Alzheimer's, CTE can also result in significant aggression and lack of impulse control. The big difference, symptoms tend to begin much earlier in life, closer to your 40s instead of your 60s. In both diseases, there's no known cure. Researchers believe there's only one way to get CTE, and that is repeated hits to the head. What happens is that you get a buildup of an abnormal protein called tau in the brain. Scientists do know both the location of the tau and how much tau in the brain determines the symptoms you might exhibit. But scientists don't yet have a magic number of hits that results in CTE. It also isn't known who exactly would develop CTE. There are some players who take many hits and never develop symptoms. Factors like genetics and age of exposure to the trauma could play a role. How do you know if you have CTE? Just because you have symptoms doesn't mean you have the disease. In fact, as things stand now, you can only be diagnosed for sure after death. Scientists are researching how to diagnose in living people. A prominent group of researchers have found over 90% of former NFL players have developed CTE. But remember something important here. The number could be so high because of something known as selection bias. That means the brains that were studied were from people who worried that they had CTE. Also, it's not just football players that need to be concerned. Boxers, soccer players, people in the military, anyone who's exposed to constant head trauma can develop it too.
Before we go, a sort of sport that combines elements of gymnastics, martial arts, parkour, and flipping out. It's known as tricking. It's probably best for people who are already in shape, and though critics say it's not useful in an actual combat situation, it's really cool to look at, really physically demanding, and really popular in movies.
Captain America, Will Ferrell, the Ninja Turtles. What's the one thing they all have in common? What is tricking?
It's a combination of jump kicks and basic kicks from martial arts such as karate, taekwondo, wushu, capoeira.
It's one of the hottest styles in stunt work right now. Blockbuster movies can't get enough of these big moves.
Can people make a living off tricking in movies?
Yes, I definitely do think so, because there are jobs out there where they specifically ask if you can trick.
Stunt people can make about $1,000 a day, and big sponsors like Red Bull are taking notice. They started competitions 2 years ago with cash prizes in the thousands.
How did tricking start?
In the mid to late 90s through the early 2000s, a lot of martial artists were doing creative forms that they could make up themselves, and they wanted to spice it up, so they would add elements of gymnastics, tumbling, and fancy kicks that you saw in Hong Kong movies. And eventually it sort of broke off from sport karate and became its own entity.
Now, more than 100 gyms around the world are offering tricking classes. This is Brooklyn Zoo in New York. Their tricking classes cost $25.
The people that we have that do come here, they see tricking and they want to do it just because it looks cool. You see somebody jump in the air, spin a few times, and throw a kick. And they're like, I didn't see that in class. And we're like, oh, that's tricking, not regular tumbling.
I think it was maybe last year, this one tricker was on the Arsenio Hall show. And that was huge for tricking, because nobody in that audience had ever seen anybody doing this type of stuff before, and then he's doing all this crazy stuff, and they're just like, whoa, it looks like what I see in the movie.
It's certainly an attractive form of athleticism that's not constricted by strict stricture. It may have its detractors, but the tricksters who aren't tricked stay on trick with the tricked out tumbling that's their ticket to success. We've got to go because trick-tock goes the clock. I'm Carl Azus.